I look at these ink-blurred pages, and I feel like screaming from my own helplessness, because now I would give all my awards for the chance to return that evening and simply tell her, "You are a genius." But back then, 40 years ago, I chose a different path. I did what cannot be undone. I killed her talent with one short movement of my hand, convincing her that it was an accident. You cannot even imagine how easy it is to destroy someone else's universe when all you have in your hands is an inkwell and a bit of professional deceit. Are you ready to listen to the confession of an old man who finally realized that his greatness is nothing but the ashes of the burned life of the only person he truly loved? I am 73. At this age, time ceases to be a river and turns into a stagnant swamp, where every memory bubbles with the poisonous gas of former ambitions. I sit in my study in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, surrounded by walls crammed full of books. Most of them were written by me. Julian Wayne, a name stamped in gold on the spines, a name that made critics hold their breath and young authors tremble with admiration. But now, as the sun slowly sinks into the cold waters of the ocean, these books seem to me not like achievements, but like rows of gravestones in a family crypt. Loneliness at my age is not the absence of people. It is their invisible presence. I hear the rustle of her dress in the hallway, although Clara has been gone for many years. I see the reflection of her eyes in the glass of the bookcases. This entire house, built with my royalties, is a monument to my selfishness, a set on which I played the role of a genius, and she was only the light that illuminated my stage until I extinguished it with my own hands. My success is ash. Every successful metaphor of mine was sucked from her living heart. I stand on the threshold of darkness and see that my masterpieces are empty, because they do not contain her true presence, only my distorted reflection. I call out to you, stop before your shadow becomes so dense that the one who loves you suffocates in it. Do not build your castle on the bones of other people's hopes. When you are left alone in an empty study, no award will warm your stiffened hands, and no print run will return that single look you betrayed for the sake of a perfect paragraph. If you are still capable of feeling shame, feel it now, listening to this. This is not just the confession of an old fool. This is an instruction for the survival of your humanity. Do not repeat my path, because at the end of this path there is nothing but a cold silver letter opener and a silence that can no longer be filled. Fame is a desert, and I am its loneliest inhabitant. Now, I will tell you how it all began, how I, like a skilled editor, began cutting away everything superfluous from her until only a shell suitable for my exhibitions remained. It was a cold, calculated cruelty that I sincerely considered love. Clara was 26, and she shone. She was like an element that could not be forced into the framework of classical syntax. That summer, she finally finished her first novel, Paper Birds. I saw how she wrote it. Her eyes burned with that wild, uncontrollable fire which I, with my cold academic mastery, always secretly despised and at the same time feared to death. Her prose was alive, it breathed, it was dangerously talented. It threatened my status as the only son in our home. I remember how she placed her notebook on my desk, the very one with the blue linen cover. "Julian, look. You know better than anyone. You are my master." These words were my sentence and my instrument. I took my Mont Blanc pen with its fine nib into my hand. It was not just a writing tool for me. That evening, it turned into a stiletto. I convinced myself that I was acting out of love. I whispered to myself, "She is still too young. Her style is too chaotic. The critics will tear her apart. I must protect her. I must give this form." But deep inside my black soul, swollen with egoism, I knew I was not editing a text. I was erasing a person. I began to cross things out. Every living word of hers, every unusual turn of phrase, I replaced with my heavy, correct, monumental constructions. I tore out pages where her voice sounded too independent. I turned her polyphony into my monotonous dictatorship. My Mont Blanc left deep grooves on the paper like scars on skin. It was perfect work. I nailed her talent to my greatness with nails, calling it polishing a diamond. The most terrible thing happened when I reached the climax of her novel. There was a scene of incredible vulnerability, some absolutely intimate confession that she had pulled from the depths of her childhood. I felt that this passage was better than everything I had ever written myself. And at that moment, I tipped over the inkwell. The thick black liquid slowly spread across the linen cover, soaking the paper, blurring her words into illegible stains. I watched her work die and felt relief. When she entered the study, I did not avert my eyes. I pointed to the ruined notebook and said in my most reliable professorial voice, "Clara, my dear, an unfortunate thing has happened, but perhaps it is a sign. You know, I read what survived. It was weak, emotional, but without form. You are not ready yet. This ink has simply saved you from disgrace." I saw her face fade. It was not an instantaneous disappearance of light. It was like a lake slowly freezing. She trusted me more than herself. She saw in me the architect of her future, not suspecting that I was merely the jailer of her soul. She nodded, her shoulders slumped, and in that second I understood. The point of no return had been passed. She would never again write a single line without my approval. She became my shadow, my apprentice, my decoration. I justified myself by thinking that now she was safe. She would be my muse. She would be beside the great writer. She would share my triumph. Listener, remember this moment. When you tell another person, "I know what is best for you," you are holding a knife in your hand. And even if you swear that you are cutting only to save, you still leave a person crippled. I watched her hunched back as she left the room and felt the taste of victory. It was the taste of iron and ink. I turned her into the perfect accessory to my life, into a cold marble statue that would never again dare to be more alive than me. I was a genius, and geniuses need sacrifices. Isn't that so? Back then, I did not yet know that together with her voice, I had killed my last chance to be truly loved. Because it is impossible to love a shadow. One can only possess it. I observed Clara over the next 30 years the way a collector observes a rare butterfly he himself has pinned to velvet under glass. She no longer rebelled. She became the perfect wife of a great man, a quiet echo of my thoughts, an elegant shadow gliding through the half-dark corridors of our house in Connecticut. My rise was rapid. My novels, The Glass Tower and Beyond the Silence, brought me a Pulitzer, world fame, and wealth that allowed us to live in luxury. At literary cocktail parties in Manhattan or at villas in Tuscany, we were the golden couple. I, a brilliant intellectual whose words were quoted, and she, the silent, elegant Clara, always standing half a step behind, holding my glass while I entertained the crowd. I saw how other men looked at her with adoration, mistaking her silence for depth and her sadness for mystery. They did not know that this silence was a cemetery. The mechanics of her fading were almost imperceptible. It was not a sudden illness or a loud scandal. It was erosion. Every morning she brought me coffee to the study, neatly laid out my correspondence, and waited. She waited for my permission, for my praise, for a crumb of attention to her own inner world, which I had once so masterfully cemented. Sometimes I saw her stop by the window, looking at the ocean, and her fingers moved involuntarily, as if she were writing something in the air. But it was enough for me to cough or call her to check a footnote in my new manuscript for those invisible letters to dissolve instantly. I turned her into my unpaid literary slave. She proofread my texts, corrected my mistakes, suggested apt metaphor, and I took it for granted as tribute owed to me. I convinced her that her talent was only an addition to my genius, that her purpose was to be a precious setting for my diamond. Every time she timidly asked whether she should try to write something of her own again, I put on the look of a weary sage. "Clara, my dear, why do you need that dirty world of publishing intrigues? You already have everything. You are part of my legacy. Isn't that enough?" And she agreed. She agreed because I taught her to fear her own voice. I created a vacuum around her in which any independent idea of hers seemed to her absurd and amateurish. This was the highest form of manipulation. I made her become her own harshest censor. Year after year she became more and more transparent. She began to speak less, smile less. Even her movements became somehow mechanical, like those of a wind-up doll. She developed a habit of sitting for hours in the library without opening a single book. She just sat in the shadow of the shelves, blending in with the spines of my works. Her life became a dedication to my name. She chose the color of my ties, planned my travels, answered letters from my admirers. She disappeared as a personality, dissolving into my I. Sometimes, in moments of rare insight, I felt a cold draft from the other side of her soul. I saw in her eyes not hatred. Hatred would have been better. It would have meant life, but emptiness. She looked through me as if I were a wall that had blocked her sun for so many years that she had already forgotten what light looked like. But I quickly drove these thoughts away. She is happy, I told myself. She is Julian Wayne's wife. What more could one dream of? How wrong I was. I thought I was building a paradise for her under my protection, but in reality, I was building her a tomb. Each of my successes was another layer of concrete on the lid of her talent. We grew old together, but I aged in the rays of glory, and she in the dust of my archives. She faded so quietly that when her heart finally stopped one cold November night, I did not even notice it at once. I thought she was just silent again. Now, looking back on these years from the height of my 73, I understand. I did not simply live at her expense. I fed on her unrealized life. I was a parasite who considered himself a titan. Clara did not just live in my shadow. She was the sacrifice I offered on the altar of my greatness without even asking her consent. And the most terrible thing is that she performed flawlessly until the very end. This morning, sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found that same notebook. Paper birds! It lay at the very bottom, under stacks of my drafts, under bills and diplomas. The blue linen had faded, turned grayish, but the black stain, it remained just as deep and ominous. I touched it with my fingers and felt a cold that even the Connecticut sun could not disperse. I opened it. Back then, 40 years ago, I only saw the ink spreading and closed the book, passing sentence on her talent. I never turned the pages further, and today I did. Under the layer of dried ink, where I thought everything was destroyed, Clara tried to save the words. She carefully traced the blurred letters with a pencil, trying to restore what I tried to erase. But that was not the most terrible thing. On the last page, dated the year of her death, I found a short note written by her already trembling hand. My dear Julian, I knew it was not an accident. I saw your hand when the inkwell tipped over. I saw your fear. You were afraid not of my failure. You were afraid of my voice. I forgave you for this in that very second, because I understood that your greatness is your prison. You needed to be the only one in order not to feel like no one. I gave you my words so that you would not die of loneliness in your paper kingdom. I hope it was warm for you there. These words struck me harder than any criticism, than any oblivion. She knew. All this time she knew about my baseness, about my small, envious surgery, and she stayed. She turned her life into a set not because she was weak, but because she was infinitely stronger than me. She sacrificed herself to my fear of being mediocre. I collapsed into the chair, clutching this notebook. My books on the shelves suddenly seemed to me like empty shells. I, the great Julian Wayne, turned out to be nothing more than a thief who stole light from the one who loved him despite everything. My greatness was only the shadow I cast on her life, and in this shadow she burned, never daring to step into the sun. Now I address you, my listener, you who may now be standing before a choice to rise yourself or to lift up the one beside you. Look at your hands. If there is an instrument in them now, it does not matter whether it is power, talent, or just a word. Ask yourself, are you building or destroying? We often justify our egoism with higher goals, rightness, or protection. We tell ourselves that we are cutting other people's wings so that they do not fall, but in reality, we are simply afraid that they will fly higher than us. Do not be afraid of someone else's greatness. True light does not take yours away. It makes the world brighter. Do not turn the person you love into a prop for your monument, because one day you will be left alone among your golden marble, and the only thing you will find is a ruined notebook that will remind you of who you could have been if you had had the courage simply to love and not to dominate. I look at the ocean. It is vast and indifferent to my tears. I will burn this notebook tonight, not to hide evidence, but to finally release her paper birds into freedom. My repentance is late, but it is sincere. If you still have time, do not wait until 73. Embrace the one who is in your shadow and step aside. Let them see the sun. That will be your only true masterpiece. Thank you for listening to an old man. I have nothing more to say.